These trends are important because each of them can create, reshape, or extinguish entire industries.
More people will exit poverty in the next decade than have in the entirety of human history.
This is not a fear story, this is an innovation story.
I was talking with one telecom client who said, 3 years ago, two of my biggest competitors never existed.
Everybody talks about China, India, Latin America from a geographic trend force, whereas Africa. 7 years ago, nobody could talk about Africa. But the ones that did very well.
Well, over the last year, I've had the opportunity to visit with about 300 CEOs to understand what's on their mind. One of the messages that has come through loud and clear is that the operating environment is undergoing a radical transformation. And that's really the result of a number of trends, demographic, technological, and also societal.
The size and scope of the changes that are happening are ones that require very significant transformation in the business model. Whether it's the move to the emerging markets, whether it's the real challenge of driving productivity growth in the developed economies, whether it's learning how to survive and thrive in an increasingly networked world, whether it's overcoming the resource challenges, whether it's learning to interact with governments in an entirely different way, businesses are going to have to change.
A number of the trends are quite obvious. But again, what I think is more interesting about them is the confluence of them coming together. There's just so much change coming at us.
It's almost like the economy has borrowed a playbook from technology industry and applied Moore's law to economic change.
Thinking about time and the competitiveness from being prepared is going to be a very important outcome from these new forces. And I remember with one of our clients, a consumer goods company in China, where they were looking at some acquisitions in a couple of key areas in the country. The problem is that these opportunities don't come up when you want them to. They come up when they're available. And so one of the things that this management team did and the CEO did was prepare the board ahead of time for the basic questions about China and this particular business and the regulators. So they were fully informed and ready because they knew that when the opportunity came up, they would have to strike very quickly. You couldn't sort of go back and say, give us 3 months. You had a week.
When people talk about this, it's the human capacity dimension that they focus on as much or more than the strategic or the financial choices. Most of them have experience of trying to operate in some of these different markets. Most have their nose bloodied at one point or another. In many instances, because they've tried to take a model that was very successful in another environment and bring it without too much change to an environment for which it may not be suited. So they all have their scars.
As we started looking at some of the demand pools in emerging markets, we noticed that many of the revenue leaders in established markets are falling way behind in terms of unit leadership of new product categories, which means basically that today's revenue leaders are not going to be tomorrow's revenue leaders.
The global middle class will double. The people who have sort of a middle class lifestyle will double. They'll add $8 trillion in consumer spend. We know an awful lot of that spend is going to take place on products whose price points have to be 20 to 25% or less of their functional equivalent. So if I would ask you to look at your R&D programs and say, what part of them are suited for a truly value-conscious world? Are they aimed at creating differentiation in a competition for relatively rich consumers, or are they delivering value at a very different price point for what is a larger mass with a large total spend, but a unit price? And so I think it becomes very much the Clayton Christensen argument, which is innovation is going to come from the bottom and work its way up.
One of the trends that we talk about is we call it the rise of the market state. I think the government is going to be playing a more intrusive role, and I mean that in its positive and negative context, role in the economy. And so CEOs and leaders are going to have to be spending more time with government, and they already are. Again, I've been spending a lot of time, I've met with over 300 CEOs and just asking them about their time use and where it is, and it's very interesting to see already the significant increase in time spent with government.
Too many companies take too short view when they're setting their strategies. They think in terms of 2 or 3 years, starting with current market positions and the guardrails of the businesses that they're in. Wayne Gretzky said it well, skate where the puck is going.
I think there's several insertion points. We would think that every strategy process, in whatever form it takes, should be informed by an upfront section about relevant trends for that business and even some broader trends that might promote new businesses aside. And it could be in the annual process, in the monthly process, in the off-sites of a supervisory board, but all the places where you discuss strategy, you can insert trends thinking. Second, I think in the more tooly part of strategy, which is how are you measuring yourself, I would deliberately measure the degree to which my resources are in favorable places against trends or in disfavorable places against trends at all levels of aggregation. And as a result, calculate a little bit, where is this ship going to float if I don't do anything?
The where do you embed this in the organization is very tricky. It's easiest to try to embed this in the strategic planning process. The challenge is, can you have any impact that way? Because often when you take long-term trends and append it to a strategic planning process, it becomes a 10-minute throwaway at the beginning. Oh, here's 9 things that are happening. Now let's talk about the BU strategies, and those will have a 1 or 2 year time frame. I think to really affect change, the challenge is to get the line executives to recognize these trends. Because if you think of these trends as forces of nature, like a change in the gravitational quotient, you have to recalculate everything about the trajectory of your business in light of the subtle shifts that are taking place. And I would suspect that if you could get that embedded in the line management, it's the day-to-day decision-making that would be done differently, that would be more powerful.
I think all effective strategies have to start from your view of the world. Where do you think some of your core supply prices will be, commodity prices? Where do you think your markets are going to be? Who do you think your competition is going to be? What are regulators going to do? One of the implications we're seeing from it is there's more appetite for cross-sector views. So if you're in healthcare, it's actually important to understand more about telecom and how mobile phones work. There's a lot of linkages on that side. And if you're a telecom player, it's important to understand what's going on in healthcare because there are innovations going on that front. And I could go through industry by industry with examples of where people are very interested in seeing what's happening in another sector.
The most difficult thing for a global MNC to contend with is the amount of restructuring and portfolio shifting that will likely need to take place over the next 10 years in order to stay ahead of the game and capture their fair share of global growth. And learning how to do that is first building the understanding of the nature of that shift, and secondly, building the conviction to act, and third, finding the types of strategic moves that actually make sense and create value are all really challenging tasks.
I think the organization implications of these trends will be quite profound. The idea of a headquarters being in New Jersey or in London or in one location, I think, is a thing of the past. I think we're going to see multiple centers.
The talent pools being created around the world are just too vast, and figuring out how to assimilate and bring those folks seamlessly into the leadership structure of a borderless corporation will be a competitive advantage.
We're going to have to re-engineer our economies and our societies to be able to unleash talent, really thinking what human capital can do.
The type of people in your top 100, where they're from, is going to change.
How will I have enough Indian nationals or Chinese nationals? Where will I find the people who really understand the internet and how it's reshaping how people purchase? To really change how I operate, to build a new set of capabilities for the institution.
Also some big implications for what leadership means in this new world, how leadership is exerted. I think that the model of the hero leader, of a CEO sitting on top of a pyramid, being decisive and making decisions, is a thing of the past. We need to obviously have decisions, but we're going to need to have more of a leadership team. It'll be more architecting people together to be able to deal with things as we move forward. I actually believe a lot more of the softer elements of leadership and culture will be important. Culture, values, because you've got to be able to empower people to be able to make decisions when information's changing without telling them and pushing them, if you know what I mean.